It happened in Gary, Indiana, in September 2023, a new construction project, just another job for me. My name is David Carter, foreman of a small but efficient construction crew contracted to renovate an abandoned steel mill on the outskirts of town. The client, a developer from Chicago, had big plans to turn the decayed ruins into a modern industrial complex. It was supposed to be a routine project, demolition, excavation, laying new foundations, but by the time we were done, none of us would ever be the same again. The site had been dead for decades, left to rot after the steel industry collapsed. The few remaining buildings were hollowed-out skeletons of rusted metal and broken glass. A thick fog often rolled in from Lake Michigan, making the air heavy with moisture and an unshakable sense of gloom. Locals avoided the place, muttering about how the land was wrong. At first, I dismissed it as small-town superstition. That was before we started digging. The first few days were smooth. We had earth movers and jackhammers tearing through the concrete, revealing old, corroded support beams and buried machinery. On the fourth day, one of my guys, Miguel, called me over. He looked spooked. He had uncovered a series of tunnels beneath the foundation, old access tunnels from when the mill was operational, but deeper than any blueprints had shown. I climbed down to check it out myself. The tunnels were narrow and lined with damp stone, unlike the concrete reinforcements I expected. There was something else, a door. Not a rusted steel hatch, not part of any known infrastructure. A massive, black iron door embedded deep in the earth. It had no handle, no hinges, no markings, just an uneven, jagged surface like something had been pounded into shape rather than forged. A creeping unease settled in my gut. That night, back at my motel, I started digging through old city records and historical archives online. The mill had changed hands multiple times. Before that, it was nothing but farmland. But one document stood out, an anonymous letter, dated 1912, warning against disturbing the ground on the mill's location. It read, "The earth there is closed for a reason. Those who dig too deep will find what should remain lost." I didn't sleep that night. Miguel never showed up for work the next day. We went to his apartment, but his truck was still in the lot, and his phone kept ringing unanswered. No one had seen him since he left the site. We should have stopped then. We should have walked away. But the money was good, and we had a job to finish. We kept digging. By the time Miguel was officially reported missing, the police had already given up. Adults disappear all the time, they told us. He probably just skipped town. But none of us believed that. Miguel was solid, reliable, not the kind of guy to vanish without telling someone. And there was one more thing that none of us wanted to say out loud. He had been the first one to touch the iron door. The next morning, the crew was uneasy, but the work had to continue. We widened the excavation site, uncovering more of the tunnel structure. The door sat there, embedded in the earth like a tumor, cold and motionless. Some of the guys refused to go near it. It made people sick. Not like food poisoning or heat exhaustion, this was different. A deep, gnawing nausea, like something was pulling at their insides. I told myself it was just stress, maybe some old industrial contaminants in the soil. But when Sam, my best heavy machine operator, vomited blood after standing near the tunnel for less than an hour, I started having doubts. Then we found the bones. At first, we thought they were animal remains, tangled in the roots of dead trees. But as we cleared more debris, it became clear human skulls, ribs, femurs, all twisted and misshapen, some with deep gouges that looked too deliberate to be caused by natural erosion. The team wanted out. I couldn't blame them. But backing out wasn't an option. The client, a man named Raymond Kessler from Chicago, called me directly. "Don't stop now, Carter." His voice was smooth, deliberate, too calm for what I had just told him. "Whatever's down there, I want it uncovered. Keep digging. Triple pay for every man who stays on site." I should have quit. Should have packed up my gear, loaded the trucks, and left. But triple pay meant something to men who had mortgages, medical bills, and families to feed. We stayed. And we dug. By nightfall, we had cleared most of the tunnel entrance, exposing the full extent of the iron door. It was bigger than we thought, 12 feet tall, 8 feet wide, buried deep beneath layers of stone. And for the first time, we saw that it wasn't just a door. It had seams, intricate grooves carved into the surface, like veins running through metal. "It's a vault," one of the guys, Darnell, muttered under his breath. "But what the hell is it keeping inside?" No one answered. No one wanted to. Then the whispering started. At first, it was subtle, just a breeze moving through the tunnel, hissing against the stone. But as we stood there, staring at the iron surface, it became something else. A murmur, low and crawling, slipping beneath the sounds of the wind, weaving through the air like it had weight. "Did you hear that?" One of the younger guys, Eddie, stepped back, looking around frantically. No one wanted to admit they did. The whispering grew louder. Voices. Not one, not two, but dozens, all speaking at once. Some fast, some slow. Some deep, some shrill. A language we didn't understand, but somehow we felt it. It wasn't just noise, it was pressing against us, inside our heads, behind our ribs. "We need to stop," Sam said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This ain't right, boss." I was about to agree. I was 1 second away from calling it off, telling Kessler to shove his money and sealing up the site forever. Then the ground shook. It was brief but violent, a tremor that sent dust cascading from the tunnel ceiling, rattling the steel framework we had set up. A single, sharp crack split the air. And then we heard it. A thud. From behind the iron door. Not metal shifting, not the sound of debris settling. A knock. Something inside was knocking. None of us spoke. None of us moved. The sound had been unmistakable, a single, deliberate knock from behind the iron door, deep and heavy, like something enormous had tapped its knuckles against the metal. My breath caught in my throat, and I saw the same expression on every one of my guys, pure, frozen fear. The whispering had stopped. The air in the tunnel felt thick, suffocating, pressing against my chest like the atmosphere had gained weight. No one wanted to acknowledge what had just happened, but we all knew. Something was on the other side. Sam dropped his shovel and took off running toward the exit. No one stopped him. Eddie and Darnell followed seconds later, clawing their way up the ladder to get out of the excavation pit. The rest of us stood there, locked in place, staring at the iron door like it might swing open at any second. Then we heard the second knock. Harder this time. Angrier. A dull boom that echoed through the tunnels, sending a shudder through the stone walls. The dust from the impact stung my eyes. My gut twisted, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. I grabbed my radio, hands shaking as I called out to the surface crew. "We're done. Pull the generators, get everyone the hell out of here." "Carter, what's going on?" The voice on the other end was Marcus, our site manager. He was still up top, monitoring the dig. "Something's wrong, get everyone back to the trucks." "We're leaving." Silence. Then, in a low voice, he said, "You've got company." I climbed the ladder, practically throwing myself out of the pit, and that's when I saw them. 3 men in black suits, standing just outside the perimeter fence. They weren't construction guys. They weren't city inspectors. They weren't from Kessler's company. They just stood there, stiff, silent, faces expressionless. Watching. One of them raised a hand and beckoned. Marcus was already in motion, hurrying toward me. "Carter, what the hell did you guys find down there?" His voice was shaking. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. The suited men were walking now, moving toward us with deliberate slowness, like they already knew we wouldn't leave. My stomach churned. We had to go. Now. I turned to tell the rest of my crew to get in the trucks, but before I could get the words out, the ground trembled again. But this time, it didn't stop. A deep, rumbling groan rolled through the excavation site, like something was shifting underground. The suits stopped in their tracks. One of them put a hand to his ear, listening to an unseen earpiece. And then, the iron door screamed. Not an actual scream. A metal shriek, long and piercing, like nails dragged across steel. It vibrated through the air, made my teeth ache, made the sky feel darker. Marcus grabbed my arm. "Carter, move." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran. The rest of the crew followed, sprinting toward the trucks, not caring about equipment, not caring about paychecks, just wanting to be anywhere but there. The suits? They didn't run. They just stood there, watching. And then I saw the thing behind them. At first, it looked like a shadow crawling up the side of the excavation pit. But shadows don't move like that. It stretched, long and unnatural, shifting like it was made of liquid, yet dragging itself with limbs that didn't make sense. I couldn't see a face. Only the eyes, black pits, darker than anything I had ever seen, staring right at me. One of the suited men turned his head slightly, as if acknowledging its presence. Then, in a voice that was calm, rehearsed, terrifyingly casual, he spoke. "You shouldn't have opened the door, Mr. Carter." We peeled out of there, tires kicking up dirt as we tore away from the site. None of us spoke as we drove. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something chasing us, but the road was empty. But in my gut, I knew it wasn't over. We didn't stop driving until we were well out of the construction site, pulling into the dimly lit parking lot of a Waffle House off I-90. Nobody spoke as we killed the engine and sat there, the truck's metal frame still shaking from the rush of our escape. The crew was silent, staring blankly ahead or at their coffee cups once we moved inside, hands shaking, eyes darting toward the door every so often, like we expected those suited men to step inside at any moment. Miguel was still missing. Sam, Eddie, and Darnell had bailed the moment they climbed out of that pit, disappearing into the night without so much as a look back. I didn't blame them. No one had called the police. What would we even tell them? That we dug too deep, that we found something that should have stayed buried, that we heard voices whispering inside our heads and something knocking from behind an iron door buried in the earth? That men in black suits appeared from nowhere, watching, waiting? That our friend had vanished and we had no logical explanation? We couldn't even explain it to ourselves, let alone to law enforcement. Marcus finally broke the silence, his voice tight, low, like he was afraid someone outside might hear. "We can't just leave it like this." The way he said it made my stomach turn. I stared at him, trying to keep my voice steady, but my hands clenched around my coffee mug. "Like hell we can't. We're done. This isn't our problem anymore." But Marcus didn't blink, didn't back down. "Carter, you know it doesn't work like that. You heard what that guy said. We opened something." His fingers gripped his cups so tightly I thought the ceramic might crack. "I don't think they're gonna let us just walk away." No one argued. Because deep down, we all knew it was true. The job was over, but something had followed us. And then my phone buzzed. The screen flashed Sam's name. I almost knocked my coffee over as I grabbed it, hesitating before answering. "Sam?" Heavy breathing. Not panicked, wet, ragged, strained. Something was wrong. "Carter," he croaked, and the way he said my name made my blood run cold. His voice was all wrong, like something had been hollowed out inside him, scraped raw and left empty. I swallowed hard, already gripping my keys, ready to move. "Where are you?" Silence. A long, dead pause. Then, softly, barely audible over the static, "I don't know." A second breath crackled on the line. Not Sam's. Too close to the receiver. Something else was there. Then the whisper came. "He saw." I felt the blood drain from my face, my chest tightening. The Waffle House felt too small, too dark, too closed in. I turned to Marcus, my hands numb. "We need to find him." We left immediately, jumping into Marcus's truck and tearing down the highway at a speed that made my hands sweat on the wheel. Sam's phone was still connected, but he wasn't talking anymore. The line was open, but all we could hear was breathing. Heavy. Labored. Like something was pressing down on him, like he was struggling to even hold onto the phone. The GPS tracker on his work-issued phone showed his location. When I saw where it was, My stomach twisted so violently I almost pulled off the road. He was back at the site. Eddie was already shaking his head before I could say anything, pressing himself back against the truck seat like he could disappear into it. No. No way. I'm not going back there. You saw those guys. You saw that thing. I didn't blame him. Every instinct in me was screaming not to go back. But this wasn't about instinct anymore. Sam was one of us. And if something had taken him, I needed to know if we could still bring him back. The construction site looked different. The fence was open when we arrived. The security shack? Empty. No guards. No lights. It was like the place had been abandoned overnight, like we were never supposed to have been here in the first place. Marcus killed the headlights as we rolled in, creeping forward in silence. The pit was still there, but the equipment was gone. No excavators, no backhoes, no sign that we had ever even worked here. They cleaned it up, Marcus muttered. Like we were never here. I gritted my teeth. No. Not they. Something else. Then my phone buzzed. A single text from Sam's number. Underneath. I followed his GPS signal, eyes locked on the pit. The tunnel entrance was still open. The ladder still led down. Eddie grabbed my arm, his grip so tight it hurt. Carter, don't do this. If he's down there, he's not Sam anymore. I knew he was probably right. But I was already moving. The tunnel smelled wrong. The stale dampness of underground stone was mixed with something else, something rotten, something that curdled in the back of my throat. The kind of stench you can't quite place, but deep down, you know it's something dead. I descended first, Marcus right behind me, the others staying topside, gripping whatever tools they had like it might somehow protect them. Not that any of us truly believed a wrench or a crowbar was going to do anything against whatever the hell was down here. The deeper we went, the colder it got. But not normal cold. The kind that settled into your bones, the kind that made your joints ache, the kind that felt like the air itself was pressing against you. Then we saw him. Sam. He was standing in front of the iron door. His back to us. His clothes were soaked, but not with water. Something thicker. Darker. I stepped forward, my throat dry. Sam? His head twitched. Not turned. Twitching, like something inside was trying to remember how to move a human body. Then, in a voice that barely sounded like him, he whispered. It's not locked anymore. Marcus grabbed my sleeve. We're leaving. Right now. Then Sam turned around. And we saw his face. His skin was stretched too tight, like dried leather pulled over bone, like something had hollowed him out and left the casing behind. His eyes were gone. Just two black holes, leaking something thick and slow. But he was smiling. A wide, impossible grin, stretching too far, full of too many teeth. And behind him, the iron door was open. The tunnel filled with whispers. Not inside our heads this time. Not hallucinations. They were in the room with us. Marcus yanked me backward as Sam stepped forward, jerking, unnatural, like a puppet on tangled strings. His lips moved, but the sound that came out wasn't his voice. You did this. The whispers swelled, 1,000 voices overlapping, unraveling, merging, shifting. And then, the shadows moved. Something came through the door. I didn't see its face. I didn't want to. Marcus and I ran like hell, scrambling up the ladder, not daring to look back. I could hear wet footsteps behind us, something dragging itself forward. The moment we reached the surface, Eddie and the others grabbed us, hauling us out, slamming the grate shut over the tunnel. We ran. And we didn't stop running until we were back in the truck, peeling out of there, leaving the site behind. We never saw Sam again. But I still have his phone. It keeps sending me messages, even though it's been disconnected. And the last one, just an hour ago? You shouldn't have left me down here. We left the site behind, but it never really left us. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sam's face, his empty, blackened eye sockets, that impossible grin, the way his body moved like something inside him had forgotten how to be human. The iron door had been open. We had run, and whatever had been behind it, it had been coming through. The thought of it made my stomach twist, but the thing that really kept me awake wasn't just that door. It was the men in the suits. The ones who had been watching, standing still as statues while something from the pit rose behind them. By morning, I was exhausted, but I forced myself out of bed and met up with Marcus. We needed answers. We needed to know what the hell we had uncovered. The rest of the crew had already made it clear they wanted nothing to do with it. Eddie and Darnell had stopped answering my calls, and Miguel was still missing. But Marcus, for all his tough talk, looked just as shaken as I felt. We spent the morning trying to dig up anything we could about the site, the men in suits, even Kessler, the guy who had hired us in the first place. But something was wrong. It wasn't just that information was scarce, it was like it had been erased. The mill had been abandoned for nearly 30 years, but records before that? Spotty at best. The land had changed hands multiple times before the steel industry collapsed. But when we tried to find blueprints of the original foundations, nothing came up. No official records. No historical listings. It was as if the tunnels, the door, the very ground we had dug into, none of it was supposed to exist. Then Marcus found something. An old newspaper article from 1911 tucked away in an archive site that hadn't been updated in decades. The headline made my blood run cold. Unidentified mass grave found on factory grounds, over 50 remains unearthed, no explanation. I leaned in, reading the details. It was short, vague, and had no follow-ups. The article simply stated that, during routine construction, a team of workers had uncovered a burial site deep in the foundation. The remains were human, badly decomposed, some showing evidence of mutilation, with markings carved into the bones. No known historical records accounted for a cemetery in that area, and authorities had quickly sealed off the site, citing health concerns. That was it. No resolution. No names. No investigation. Just buried and forgotten. Marcus exhaled sharply. We were never supposed to find that door. I sat back in my chair, rubbing a hand over my face. It wasn't just a tunnel. It wasn't just an old industrial site. That place had a history, one that someone, or something, had been trying to keep hidden for over a century. And we had torn it open. That's when my phone rang. The number was blocked. I almost didn't answer. But my gut told me I already knew who it was. I put it on speaker, and the voice that came through sent an immediate shiver down my spine. You need to stop asking questions, Mr. Carter. Marcus and I exchanged a look. The voice was smooth, controlled, unbothered, like we were discussing a business deal instead of the nightmare we had stumbled into. I cleared my throat, trying to steady my voice. Who is this? A slight pause. Do you know what you've done? The voice continued. That door was closed for a reason. Do you understand that? My stomach twisted. They knew. Whoever this was, they had known about the iron door long before we found it. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm. Who are you? Your contract is terminated, the voice replied, ignoring my question. Mr. Kessler will not be reaching out to you again. You will not return to the site. You will not discuss this with anyone. Consider this your only warning. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. And if we don't, you won't have the chance to make that mistake. The line went dead. Marcus and I sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the phone. My hands felt clammy. We had barely escaped that site with our lives, and now someone was trying to bury it all, bury us with it if they had to. My first instinct was to pack my things, leave town, never look back. But that wasn't an option anymore, because I knew, deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Something had come through. And it wasn't going to stay underground. That night, I lay awake in my motel room, staring at the ceiling, the old newspaper article replaying in my mind. A burial site. A mass grave. No records of who they were or why they were there. The iron door had been built over their bones, locking something beneath the earth. And when we uncovered it, something had knocked back. A part of me still hoped this was all some industrial accident, some long-buried crime that a company didn't want uncovered. That maybe the suits were just corporate cleanup, and the door was nothing more than a sealed-off sector of an old factory. But Sam wasn't missing. Miguel wasn't missing. They had been taken. Or worse. And then, at 3:03 a.m., I heard it. A knock. Not at my door. From inside the room. The knock wasn't at my motel room door. It came from inside. A deep, heavy thud, like something had hit the wall just a few feet from my bed. My entire body went rigid. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly sat up, ears straining against the silence. The air was thick, unmoving. My gut twisted with a primal certainty. I was not alone. I reached for the lamp beside the bed and flicked it on. The room lit up with a dull, yellow glow, casting harsh shadows across the cheap wallpaper and scratched wooden desk. Nothing looked disturbed. The closet door was still shut. The bathroom door still slightly ajar, exactly how I had left it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted when the lights came on, like the room itself had changed ever so slightly in the darkness before I could see. I exhaled slowly and swung my legs over the side of the bed. My boots were on the floor where I had kicked them off, my jacket draped over the chair. Everything was in its place. But I couldn't ignore the way my skin crawled, the way the back of my neck prickled like unseen eyes were locked onto me. Then my phone buzzed. The screen was face down on the nightstand, but I could see the glow illuminating the surface of the cheap wood. Slowly, I reached for it, flipping it over with an unsteady hand. No caller ID. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. Every rational part of me screamed not to answer. But then I remembered what had happened the last time I ignored one of these calls, Sam's voice, hollow and wrong, telling me it wasn't locked anymore. I pressed accept and put the phone to my ear. I didn't say anything. At first, there was nothing but the low hum of static, like an old radio struggling to pick up a signal. Then, through the distortion, I heard breathing. Slow. Ragged. Too close to the speaker. Then, a voice. You shouldn't have left me down here. I nearly dropped the phone. My blood turned ice cold, every nerve in my body locking up in primal fear. It was Sam. Or at least, it sounded like him. But the way the words came through the receiver, warped and strained, made my stomach churn. Like the voice was too thin, stretched, as if it had been pulled through something it wasn't supposed to pass through. I forced my throat to work. Sam? My voice barely came out. A pause. Then, the whisper came again. It's still open. My breath hitched. The static grew louder, rising in intensity, crackling like something was moving through it. The air in my room felt heavier, suffocating, like the pressure had changed. Then the line went dead. And immediately, the lights flickered. A deep, gut-wrenching thud shook the wall again. This time, it was louder. More forceful. I shot to my feet, my heart hammering in my chest. It was coming from the closet. I took a step back, pulse roaring in my ears. The closet door stood perfectly still. But as I stared at it, something felt wrong. Like the edges weren't quite straight anymore. Like the wood had begun to soften, bulging slightly outward, like something inside was pressing against it from the other side. Then, a second knock. I took another step back, my legs brushing against the bed. My mind was racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But deep down, I knew it was. I reached for my bag, hands trembling as I yanked it onto the bed and dug inside for my truck keys. I needed to leave. Now. The moment my fingers closed around them, the closet door breathed. It wasn't movement. It wasn't the hinges shifting. The wood itself flexed, expanding outward for just a second, like lungs filling with air. And then came the third knock. A slow, deliberate boom that shook the entire room. The door handle twisted. I didn't wait to see what was behind it. I lunged for the motel room door, throwing it open so hard it banged against the wall. The hallway was empty. I ran, sprinting past the other rooms, my boots slamming against the thin carpet. I didn't look back. I didn't care if anyone else was awake. The only thought in my mind was getting out. The moment I hit the parking lot, I saw Marcus standing by his truck, his phone in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He had gotten a call too. I barely had time to register the look on his face before the motel went dark. Every light, inside and out, shut off at once. The buzzing of the motel sign cut out, plunging the lot into absolute blackness. The only illumination came from the dim orange glow of the streetlights down the road, casting long, stretching shadows. Then I heard it. The whispers. Not in my head this time. Not through a phone. They were in the motel. Low, overlapping voices slithering through the walls, moving through the rooms, seeping into the air like smoke. The same whispering we had heard underground, the same sound that had filled the tunnel before the door had opened. Then, far down the hall, in the darkness, a figure stepped out of one of the rooms. Marcus grabbed my arm, his voice hoarse. "We need to go. Right now." I didn't argue. We tore across the lot, jumping into the truck just as the figure began moving toward us. I didn't get a good look, I didn't want to. But as I slammed the door shut and Marcus threw the truck into gear, I caught a glimpse of something too tall, too thin, its arms hanging at unnatural angles. And as we sped out of the lot, tires screeching, I saw it step onto the pavement. Not walking. Just shifting forward. Moving in a way that made my skin crawl. And then the whispers rose to a deafening pitch. I slammed my hands over my ears, the sound crawling under my skin, filling my head, my chest, pressing against my ribs. Marcus was shouting something, but I couldn't hear him over the thousands of voices layered together. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, silence. The streetlights flickered back on. I turned to look out the window. The motel was normal again. Lights on, parking lot empty. The figure was gone. But I knew better. We weren't safe. Because as we drove away, Marcus gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "We have to go back," he said, his voice hollow. I turned to him, my stomach sinking. Back where? He didn't look at me. Just stared at the road ahead, jaw clenched. Back to the site. Back to the door. We drove in silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on us like a lead blanket. The motel had disappeared into the night behind us, swallowed by the empty stretch of highway, but I could still feel its presence lingering. The whispers. The thing in the hallway. The knocking from the closet. None of it had followed us physically, but I knew, deep in my gut, that we hadn't escaped. Not really. Marcus kept his eyes locked on the road, his fingers clenched so tightly around the wheel that the muscles in his forearms twitched. I could hear his breathing, shallow and uneven, like he was trying to hold something down, keep himself from shaking. Finally, he broke the silence. "We have to go back to the site, Carter." His voice was raw, like he had been screaming. Maybe he had, maybe we both had, back in that parking lot when the motel went dark and the whispers swarmed us like smoke. I turned to him, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest like a stone. Go back? The idea made my skin crawl. My entire body rebelled against it. Everything logical in me screamed that we should be putting as much distance between ourselves and that place as possible. But logic hadn't meant much since the moment we unearthed that iron door. "You're out of your damn mind," I muttered, rubbing my hands over my face, trying to slow the pounding in my skull. That door should have stayed buried. We should have never gone near it. Now it's open, and you want to go back? "It doesn't matter what we want anymore," Marcus said, his voice tight. "You saw what's happening. It's not just down there anymore, Carter. It's out. It's following us. You think this stops if we just drive in the other direction? You think we can just disappear and pretend none of this happened?" I didn't answer, because I knew he was right. My phone buzzed. I flinched, heart lurching, before I forced myself to look at the screen. Another text from Sam's number. Come back. My breath left me in a slow, shaky exhale. They know where we are, I whispered. Marcus didn't respond, but his grip tightened on the wheel. We both knew who they were. The voices. The things in the dark. The ones who had been waiting behind that door, pressing against it for God knows how long, scratching at the edges of our world until we finally gave them a way in. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. And what exactly do you think we're supposed to do when we get back there? Close the damn thing? We don't even know how it opened in the first place. Marcus let out a humorless laugh. Doesn't matter. We're the ones who dug it up. That makes it our problem. I hated that he was right. We drove on, the road stretching out ahead of us like an open wound. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by the rolling blackness of the Indiana countryside. Fields of dry grass, skeletal trees, and the occasional abandoned farmhouse, all swallowed in shadow. The night felt too still, like even the wind had abandoned this place. The GPS led us back the way we had come, the coordinates still burned into Marcus's screen from our last visit. It felt wrong, like retracing our steps to our own execution. Then, just past the county line, we saw the first watcher. Standing on the side of the road. Tall. Motionless. Dressed in black. Shit, I breathed, stomach twisting. They know we're coming. Marcus didn't slow down. He just kept driving, eyes fixed on the road, jaw clenched tight. I turned my head as we passed the figure, but I couldn't see a face. Just a smooth, pale surface where features should have been. I turned back quickly, pulse hammering in my throat. You saw that, right? I asked. Yeah, Marcus muttered. Neither of us said anything else. But then, a mile down the road, another one. Standing in the field. Watching. And then another. And another. Lined along the road, spaced apart like sentinels, all of them standing still, waiting. No faces. Just blank, pale skin. They weren't trying to stop us. They were just making sure we kept going. By the time we reached the site, my hands were numb from gripping the dashboard, my breath coming in uneven bursts. The watchers had stopped appearing about a mile back, but their presence still clung to me like oil. The construction site was just as we had left it, abandoned, silent, empty. The pit was still there, yawning open in the earth, the tunnel leading down into darkness. The iron door was waiting. We killed the engine and sat there for a long moment, neither of us wanting to make the first move. This is the dumbest thing we've ever done, I muttered. Probably, Marcus agreed. Then he grabbed the flashlight and opened the door. I followed. The dirt crunched under our boots as we approached the pit, our breaths visible in the frigid night air. It felt colder here, like the earth itself had never quite warmed up after the door was opened. We climbed down the ladder, one step at a time, the darkness swallowing us inch by inch. The moment my feet hit the tunnel floor, I knew something had changed. The door was wide open. No mistaking it this time. The jagged iron edges were pulled back, revealing a gaping black void beyond, deeper than anything we had seen before. The air pouring from inside was wrong, thick, humid, carrying a scent that made my stomach churn. And from the darkness, we heard something move. Not footsteps. Not breath. Something shifting, unfolding. Stretching. Then, slowly, from the depths of the void, a hand emerged. Not human. Too long. Too many joints. The skin slick, glistening under the weak beam of Marcus's flashlight. My body locked up. Every part of me screamed to run. But we were already too late. Because the thing behind the door was climbing out. I couldn't move. My body refused to obey. Every muscle locked in place as the thing crawled out of the iron door, stretching itself into the tunnel like it had been trapped in too tight a space for far too long. My brain struggled to make sense of it. Its shape was wrong, shifting, unfolding and folding again, as if deciding what form it wanted to take. Marcus stood beside me, flashlight shaking in his hand, the beam flickering over its two long limbs, its slick, gleaming flesh that looked both solid and liquid at the same time. Then, it lifted its head. At least, I think it was a head. No eyes. No nose. Just a slit where a mouth should have been, stretching open wider and wider, revealing nothing but blackness. It made no sound. Not at first. But then, in a voice that was too familiar, too wrong, it spoke. Carter. I flinched. The voice was Sam's. But it wasn't him. It was the tone, the cadence, but something underneath it twisted the words into something unnatural. Marcus swore under his breath, stepping back. The thing twitched, then snapped its head toward him. Marcus. It knew our names. I wanted to run. My legs wouldn't move. My entire body was locked in that moment, watching as it shifted again, its limbs bending at unnatural angles, cracking as they lengthened, sharpened, taking a form that mimicked something almost human, but just wrong. Like a drawing of a man sketched by someone who had never actually seen one before. And then it took a step forward. The tunnel shook. The air grew thick with whispers, no longer distant, no longer confined to the edges of my perception. They were all around us, pressing in from every direction, 1,000 voices overlapping, weaving together like tangled roots. You opened the door. I couldn't breathe. You let us out. My fingers dug into the handle of my knife at my belt, but I knew, deep down, it wouldn't matter. You should not have done that. The thing moved again. Faster this time. Too fast. Marcus reacted first. He threw the flashlight. Not out of strategy, out of sheer panic. It bounced off the thing's chest, hitting the ground, spinning wildly as it illuminated the tunnel in quick, erratic bursts. For just a second, I saw more. There was something behind it. Something bigger. The whispers surged, no longer voices, but screams. Run. Marcus grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. My legs finally worked. We turned and bolted back toward the ladder, the tunnel closing in around us, the air thick, suffocating, almost alive. Behind us, it followed. Not running. Gliding. Stretching. Expanding. I reached the ladder first, practically throwing myself onto the rungs, scrambling upward, my boots slipping on the damp steel. I didn't look down. I didn't want to see how close it was. Marcus was right behind me, breathing hard, muttering curses under his breath as he climbed. The whispers grew louder. The earth itself began to tremble. I reached the top, hauling myself over the edge, collapsing onto the dirt. Marcus was just behind me. He scrambled up, reaching for my hand. And then he screamed. His body jerked downward. I grabbed his wrist, planting my feet against the ground, pulling with everything I had. Something had him. His face twisted in panic, his other arm grappling at the dirt, trying to claw his way up. I could feel it too, a force, something pulling him back down, trying to drag him back into the tunnel. Don't let go, he roared. I gritted my teeth, muscles burning, yanking him with all the strength I had left. Then, a sound. A sharp, high-pitched screech, so loud it split the air. The thing let go. Marcus surged upward, rolling onto the dirt beside me, panting, coughing, his face streaked with sweat and dust. The whispers stopped. The tunnel fell silent. And then, the iron door began to close. We both scrambled back as it slowly, deliberately, sealed itself shut, the jagged edges grinding together, locking away whatever was behind it. The ground trembled once more, a deep, final breath. And then, stillness. The only sound left was our own ragged breathing. Marcus stared at the door, his chest rising and falling like he had just run for miles. I could see dark bruises forming on his arm where something had grabbed him, deep impressions left in his skin, like fingers that had pressed too hard. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Marcus let out a shaky breath. I think we just barely made it. I didn't say anything, because I wasn't sure he was right. I wasn't sure we had made it at all. We didn't move for what felt like forever, just sitting there on the cold dirt, staring at the sealed iron door as if it might suddenly crack open again. It didn't. The ground was still beneath us, the air unnervingly silent, too silent. The kind of silence that doesn't feel natural, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Marcus was still gasping, clutching his arm where the bruises had already darkened, ugly shapes pressing into his skin like fingerprints that didn't belong to anything human. I knew we needed to leave, but I couldn't make myself stand. Something felt unfinished. Like we had closed the door, but we hadn't really stopped anything. I could still feel them. Not behind the iron, not trapped in the tunnel anymore, some of them were already out. Marcus must have felt it too because, finally, in a slow, hoarse voice, he muttered, "We didn't fix anything, did we?" I swallowed, shaking my head. No. We didn't. The men in the suits knew. They had been watching. They had let this happen. And now, the door was closed, but whatever had escaped before it shut was still out here. Somewhere. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the way my legs shook. "We need to go." Marcus nodded and struggled to stand, still gripping his arm, but we didn't say anything else as we moved toward the trucks. Every step felt wrong. Like we had come back here expecting a final confrontation, some kind of closure. But the truth was worse than that. This wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. The drive back was quiet. Too quiet. The road stretched ahead of us, empty and endless, our headlights cutting through the dark. My fingers clenched the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles ached. I kept expecting to see them again. The Watchers. The things that had lined the road on our way in. They weren't there. And that was somehow so much worse. I don't know how long we drove before Marcus let out a sharp breath. "Stop the truck." I didn't ask why. I could already see it. A figure standing in the middle of the road. A man in a black suit. Waiting for us. I hit the brakes, the truck skidding slightly before stopping a few yards away from him. He didn't move. Just stood there, hands at his sides, his face unreadable beneath the dim glow of the headlights. Then, without looking away, he lifted one hand and beckoned. I felt my stomach twist. "Carter," Marcus muttered, voice low. "We shouldn't be here." I opened the door before I could stop myself. Marcus cursed but followed as I stepped out, the cold night air cutting into my skin. The man in the suit didn't react as we approached. He simply watched. "You closed it," he said, voice smooth, unbothered. The same voice from the phone call. I gritted my teeth. Not before something got out. A small, almost amused smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Yes. But that was inevitable. Marcus tensed beside me. "What the hell does that mean?" The man exhaled, slow and measured, as if choosing his words carefully. "The door was never meant to be opened. Not by you. Not yet." His gaze locked onto mine, and for a brief second, I swore I saw something behind his eyes. Something dark, something shifting, like there was more inside him than there should be. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "We know this wasn't just some old tunnel. We know what was behind that door. So why the hell did you let us dig it up?" A long pause. Then, very softly, he said, "Because we needed to see what would happen." A cold wave of dread crawled up my spine. "See?" Marcus echoed, his voice tight. "Observe. Document. Understand." The man tilted his head slightly. The ones who were trapped there, their reach was limited. Until now. Until you gave them a way out. Marcus took a step forward, fist clenched. "You used us?" The man didn't blink. "You were convenient." My breath came out in an unsteady exhale. "How many got out?" Another pause. Then, finally, the man said, "Enough." A sick, twisting feeling coiled in my stomach. I swallowed hard. "And what happens now?" For the first time, the man in the suit smiled. Not amused. Not smug. Something else. Now we wait. The air felt heavier. The shadows around us stretched just a little too far. The stars above us, bright and clear just moments ago, seemed duller. Like something had pressed against the sky itself. Marcus and I stood there, rigid, waiting for something else, some answer, some warning, something. But the man simply stepped back, melting into the darkness at the edge of the road. Gone. Just like that. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the drive. We didn't stop until we reached a gas station miles away from the site, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as we leaned against the hood of the truck, breathing hard. This doesn't end here, does it? Marcus finally muttered. I shook my head, staring down at my hands, still covered in dirt from the site. No. It doesn't. And in that moment, I knew we had closed the door. But the real horror had just begun.